Hi folks, Kevin here. Well, it's May 24th, 2017, and of course Memorial Day weekend is coming up here in the United States, and now it's considered sufficient to get our crops in the ground. The last frost date usually comes up just before Memorial Day weekend. Last week, 1 week ago, just 1.5 weeks ago, we did have a pretty hard frost. It killed a lot of the buds, killed a lot of the leaves on some of the trees, including the hardy kiwi. Lost all the first sets of leaves that came out, but since then new leaves have emerged just fine. So it's time to pull the tarps off the beds and all, and so I'm in zone 1, and we have zone 1, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G we haven't developed yet. But behind me is one of the permanent raised beds. Now we do use the weed mats down, which really helps an awful lot, and you could see in a video last June, I think it was, me creating these beds, and it's been very successful. But this is the one zone area that we did not tarp, and as a result, and the reason that we didn't tarp this area was because into the winter we were still harvesting broccoli and kale for the chickens and the ducks. So that really helped out a lot. However, you pay the price in the springtime because we didn't have the tarps down in this bed, so weeds have come up. Certainly the kale has re-emerged and going to flower and going to go to seed. So that's more work prepping these beds as opposed to the beds in the rest of the areas. Now these beds behind me, I just pulled the tarps off and it worked out really well, and I'm going to turn the camera around so I can point to a couple areas. Now this whole bed really did extremely well with the tarps in place. However, you may recall in a previous video I showed that we had the high winds and the tarps kept coming loose. Well, right here is the consequences of one of the tarps, which no matter what I did with our number 2 stone filled sacks and all the lumber in the back of the trailer that we had holding down the tarps, we just get such high winds that some of the seeds that came from the various plants and all, they germinated, and some of the weeds that were here previously came up and weren't sufficiently killed as a result. So I'm going to end up pulling off these weed mats, running the rotary harrow over them. I'll broadfork them first. I'll cut off whatever tops there still are here from some of the peppers previously. And on the far side over there, I did add some compost to those beds last fall. And that compost raised up those beds because that's where we're growing a lot of our leeks. And we're going to go try and go deeper than 9 inches this year. Our leek seedlings are all up over a foot tall right now. So we'll see just how well that works out, if we can get some really nice tall leeks. Here are a couple of the tarps that were on this bed. And one more, that's a little bit smaller tarp there. And that's the one kept getting dislodged. Go around to the other side. So this is zone 1D. You can see that tarp I just pulled off. This is where we grow the sweet potatoes last year. I topped this off with some more compost in the fall as well. But you can see it really did a good job of killing out any of those emergent seedlings. Now we don't have black or clear tarp. We have the reflective silver one, so it doesn't heat up quite as much, but it did hold the moisture underneath. Over there in the hoop, some of the weeds did come up because I didn't get that tarp, but I did go ahead and remulch it with some wood chips. So the next stage is pulling up these weed mats, broad forking the areas, and then what we've got to do is run the rotary harrow down here and prep the beds, and then set down our irrigation system and reapply the weed mats, and then get ready for the transplants. So there's three things that I've thought about that I think are important with the video that I've just created. And one of them is using the tarps. I mentioned before using black tarps, and that's what most people, most market farmers, I think Curtis Stone, Elliot Coleman, certainly Jean-Martin Fortier, the market gardener, all of these people have talked about using, occultation, using a non-permeable, opaque tarp to help stimulate a moist, dark environment for the weed seeds, or any seed for that matter, that are beneath the tarp. That stimulates them to germinate. And in the absence of sunlight and airflow, those seeds that do germinate eventually, and the environment has to be warm as well, and we're in a really cold temperate climate, so having the areas tarped all winter doesn't do very much. It's got to be the springtime when things warm up, the seeds, weed seeds that are there, start to germinate. They don't have exposure to sunlight. The tarp is not perforated, so it doesn't get extra moisture, and there isn't the airflow. Those weed seeds germinate, and they basically die off. And that is a technique that's been used for, I don't know, quite some period of time. I think the French may have developed that technique as well. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about. And there's a big disparity between the areas that I didn't have tarped and the areas that were tarped and tarped well. I had the one section that I mentioned that the wind had blown the tarp up, therefore allowing air and sunlight exposure as well. And I have weed seeds germinated in that area. The next thing is, during the video, you could see that I was pulling out staples that hold down the weed mats. And there's really two types of staples that I was using. And I'll try to insert a close-up shot of these. But I had some difficulty getting some of the staples out. Now both of these are just one season old. Just last spring I put 1 year old. Last spring I put these weed mats down, or early summer. And we used two different types. Some that were less expensive, that were not galvanized or not zinc coated, and some that were. Same gauge, same length, 6 inches. The ones that were galvanized really are reusable multiple seasons. I don't know how many seasons yet, but they come out looking just like brand new. The ones that weren't galvanized have so much rust on them, they aggregate with the materials that are there in the soil, and you have to break it down, and it actually tears some of the weed barrier as you're removing it. And it's going to make it more difficult to reuse these again. And I can't see a timely, easy way of re-cleaning these. So I really would recommend getting the galvanized ones if you have the opportunity. I'm sure you can get them many different places. The largest group that I can get them at right now, and I'll put a link in the description below, on Amazon. They make the 9 gauge, 11 gauge, I'm sure other gauges as well. The 11 gauge seems to go through pretty easy. We're pretty rocky soil. I like the 9 gauge. The lower the number, the heavier the metal. That works pretty darn well here. But actually the 11 gauge did work. The third thing that I think that's important is the use of the broadfork. I know many people still believe in using rototiller. The rototiller does a lot of destruction, and I'm not trying to knock everybody who's using rototillers. When I was a kid, that's what everybody used for their gardens. And the more we understand soil, the more we realize that, well, we do a lot of destruction at the same time. And we put more oxygen in, we take all that organic material down into the area, and it's an explosion of energy down there at that time. But more importantly, the structure of the soil, there are soil horizons, and that structure, all of those pores and aggregates that are created as a result of the bacterial and fungal and protozoan activity, all of those, and certainly the nematodes, All of those important aggregates and structural components are disrupted every time we do anything with the soil and break it up. So the broadfork, and I think was developed by a Frenchman in 1960, I can't remember his name, and you saw me using this one, and there are many different broadforks out there. The broadfork, it's a physically it's an ergonomic tool. It's a tool that we can use without putting a lot of strain on our bodies. There are many different styles out there with curved forks that go into the ground. The forks that I got in this one are 10 inches long. They're about 3 inches apart. The whole tool is about 24 inches wide. I think, you know, a small man or an average sized woman could easily use it. You see, I don't have any trouble using it at all. You put it in straight, you let it go down as far as it can. If your soil is really tough, you put your foot on it and really work it down deep. And what we're trying to do is just basically create some increased porosity without turning the soil over. We want to allow water and air to get down in at whatever depth. And for the spines on this, or the forks on this one, are 10 inches. So I get good 10 inches. But I'm not inverting it. It's not like double digging or rototilling. I'm doing as little destruction as possible to the soil when we use the broadfork. I got this idea after really following the work of Elliot Coleman and Jean-Martin Fortier. And certainly like Curtis Stone, he uses a hand fork. He likes that. Some of my neighbors use hand forks. For me, the broad fork, even in my permanent raised beds that I have, the ones, the handicap accessible ones, I just get right up there and I can work right down the row in no time at all. It seems to be very effective at basically loosening up. Probably I keep I move back about 6 inches, 4 to 8 inches each time, and just loosen it up. You'll see in some videos, some people actually pull the handles way down, which really almost turns the soil. And I try to do as little turning as possible. As I'm doing it, you can see the worms as it separates, and I lift that I'm going to say block almost, as you could see in the video. The block sort of rises a little bit as a result of the forks being pulled backwards, the handles being pulled back towards me. And you actually can see the worms working the way back into the section there. And you can see all the pores. It's almost like looking at live rock, which in reef systems, and I've been a reefer, coral reef enthusiast for many years, and it's those micropores that are in there which gives the coral reefs all the life, because that's where all the bacterial organisms live. Not just bacteria, but all different microorganisms live in those little pores. And that's how we do our bioremediation in some of the other systems that you see. All of those micropores are very important. So it's the microorganisms that live in our gut, the microorganisms that live in the soil, that really provide all of the beneficial nutrients and communication between mutually symbiotic organisms that result in the transfer of the energy and all the nutrients to the plants that we're going to consume. And by using the broad fork, we do as little destruction as possible. I'm not poo-pooing everybody who does rototilling. I understand that. There are times when it is used. I actually did break down and buy, I was dead against using a rototiller, but when I bought my BCS, the salesperson said, "You're really going to want this." I'm not too satisfied with it, to tell you the truth, because like this property is basically a gravel source. And I have locked that unit up a couple of times just with the, you get a few rocks about 4 to 6 inches, it gets in between the times and it just stops that machine dead. And I've got a pretty good sized BCS. Whereas the rotary harrow, I can just set that, and I'll make another video about that, me going over the beds. But I can set that, to a ½ inch if I want, to 1 inch. Depending on the circumstances, I'll only be loosening and adjusting, creating an ideal seating surface or mat surface with the rotary harrow. So that's a great tool to use. And it does as little destruction, just like we're using the broadfork. I really don't want to destroy the structural integrity of all the work that's been done by the microorganisms that benefit the food that we're getting off the property. So those are the three things, you know, the occultation using tarps to suppress weeds, and I'll go over the flame weeder and solarization as well. I'll go over some of the other techniques that we use and some of the hand tools in future videos. None of this is brand new by me. I'm just following what other people are doing, and it certainly has saved us a lot of time and energy. And time is something that, you know, we're always trying to get as much use out of the time that we have available and not do things that aren't necessary. Certainly the stakes, I think using coated staples, if you do use staples for it. I know most people will just turn the soil up on the edges of the mats, and I think that that's fine if you've got the resources to do that. I don't have enough wood chips to be able to hold down all my weed mats, and we have such high winds I have to use a lot of staples. And certainly the broadfork. So I hope this video was somewhat informative. If you thought it was helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share it. If you have questions or comments, please leave them below. I'm really interested in getting feedback. I do read the comments. I will respond bit by bit as I get the opportunity. Right now I'm just going crazy. Sorry to make excuses. But I really appreciate you watching, and I do enjoy your comments. Thanks so much, folks, and have a fantastic day. Let's grow something. Grow something highly nutritious for our own bodies. Take care. Bye-bye now.